Three phones with 3 rear cameras on each one. These are the state of the art, but can you tell the difference in the image quality? Welcome to Machines More. I'll be doing something a little bit different today. We're going to be looking at the rear cameras on the new iPhone 13 Pro, the 12 Pro it's replacing, and also the similarly sized Galaxy S21. Hey, if you like this sort of stuff, make sure you hit subscribe for future content just like this and all sorts of other tech content. So there's an adage that the best camera is the one you have with you. Okay, but if you always have one of these with you and the camera is one of your main priorities, which one of these do you want in your pocket? And this won't be a phone or Android versus iOS comparison per se, but if the camera is your primary focus, then perhaps you might want to frame your choice within this context. If you've already made your choice, hopefully this review will still be engaging, informative, and an entertaining test. These are the state of the art right now in 2021, and this camera bump is enormous on the 13 Pro. And the 13 Pro is the latest from Apple. It launched about a week and a half ago on September 24th, and there's a whole bunch of new features that Apple has been highlighting, including the so-called cinematic video and the macro capability of the ultra-wide lens. And those are all nice headline features, and we'll talk about some of those, but I'm really more curious about the bread and butter features of the camera. The good news is, as of this generation, the 13 Pro has the highest end camera setup it shares with the 13 Pro Max. The 12 Pro has been my daily driver since late last year, and I know the camera capabilities pretty well at this point. It's still very current, even though it is officially usurped by the 13 Pro, but since the wide and ultra-wide cameras are shared on the iPhone 12, which is still in the retail lineup, you can also use this comparison video as a reference for that. The Galaxy S21, even though it's not the highest end S21 Ultra that Samsung offers right now, it's a similar form factor as the other two phones, and at least personally speaking, that form factor of the Ultra and also the Apple Pro Max is too big to be useful to me, and I think at least spec-wise, these three are a reasonable comparison. 12 Pro is the oldest model out of the bunch, technically speaking. All the cameras on the 12 Pro are 12 megapixels. The standard wide lens on the 12 Pro is a 26mm f1.6. The ultra wide is a 13mm f2.4. And the tele here is a 52mm f2.0, and that focal length is twice as long as the standard length, so it's a 2x tele relative to the standard lens. The upgraded 13 Pro keeps the resolution at 12 megapixels for all the cameras, but the standard 26mm wide gets a little bit faster at f1.5. The ultra-wide 13mm also gets an upgrade to an f1.8, and while the tele gets longer, roughly 3x now at 77mm, it is down to an f2.8 aperture. For the S21, which was introduced earlier this year, the standard wide lens is a 26mm f1.8, 12 megapixels. The ultra-wide is a 12 megapixel 13mm f2.2. Finally, a little bit different, the tele is a 64 megapixel 28 f2, so it's using its extra resolution for some digital zoom here, and we'll see just how well that works in the following test. The numbers are just numbers though, so let's do this. I've shot a variety of videos and some stills in both indoors and outside, and let's just see in a side-by-side comparison if you can identify which is which and which one you prefer. I'd want to keep things as real-world as possible, so for the majority of filming I used the phones how most people would, which is with auto exposure and handheld, but I did mount on a small handle so I could hold it for some stability and consistency, and the framing was kept as consistent as possible between all three phones. All the video, with the exception of the cinematic video, is shot in 4K, and a lot of the outdoor stuff is retimed 60p to 24p. For the photos, you'll notice that a lot of them are presented in the 16:9 resolution, which is actually the 4:3 image with the top and bottom cropped off. That yields a smaller 9 megapixels, but that will give you the same image as if I shot in 4:3 and then cropped the top and bottom to fit this video ratio. For the image quality portion of this test, you'll see a sequence of videos and photos labeled A, B, and C, and sometimes there'll be companion still photos that are taken of the same scene with the same phone. So go ahead, enjoy. I'll come back, share some thoughts on those specific samples and how that relates to real world use of these cameras. I'll do some other functional tests to show you, and I'll wrap it up with a general commentary about the cameras on these phones. Alright, so how many did you get? I hope that was a fun test for you. I was curious myself how these would stack up, and it was a lot of fun shooting those. Generally speaking, I think for the outdoor shots and good lighting, these cameras are all pretty good, and it's hard to tell apart for practical purposes, and I think most people will be pretty happy with any of these. But looking at this with a more critical eye, and I did this test myself a few times, and one of these was pretty easy to pick out consistently, and that was the S21. For example, Samsung's approach here, if you look at the pumpkin, looks a little bit more heavy-handed on the sharpening. To me, it's a little bit overdone, and it ends up making it look more jagged. Now, those highlights are a bit hot for my liking, and the image just renders color a little bit less pleasantly and less smooth. In the shadow areas with the scarecrows seen here, you can see a lot more noise with the S21 on the pergola in the background and the bark. There's a lot of noise, but the white on the pergola in the shadows is definitely off in terms of the color. In good lighting, the two iPhones are pretty closely matched, and I had a really difficult time telling them apart. Indoors though, in artificial lighting, the S21 falls short here. In the studio scene, it's a pretty well lit scene just like what you're seeing right now, but so much of the S21's image just lags behind the other two. The image is noisy, the color is unflattering, and overall I think it's lacking in detail. In really poor lighting, the iPhones exposed the scene more accurately to what it looked like, and by doing so avoided a very noisy image like what the S21 produced, seemingly with a higher ISO. In the night mode, the S21 is lacking in detail a little bit, but even though the 13 Pro's image seems sharper in the details, I prefer the 12 Pro's color overall from an accurate representation standpoint. And as for that tele lens, yeah, the S21's use of the higher resolution sensor with a shorter focal length resulted in a lower quality image when compared to either of the iPhones, and even though the 12 Pro only has that 2x tele. Now, resolution matters, but the pixel binning that is happening on the S21 doesn't quite beat Apple's decision to pair a more standard sensor with a longer lens. Speaking of teles, my wife's passion vine, Passiflora, happened to bloom over the weekend, so I had a great opportunity to test out the close focusing imaging capability of the cameras, and it was almost perfect timing because I tell you, these things are super detailed and have very special flowers, but these blossoms, they are here today, gone the next. And with the high resolution sensor, the S21 in tele mode can actually get quite close, and I was not expecting it to be so good. Now, coupled with the way the 28mm lens throws the background a little more out of focus, it actually yields a pretty good image. You can kind of see the grain in the image, and it's not as technically perfect, but for a phone camera, I think the S21 gives a very decent image here. The 12 Pro with the 2x tele can't get as close, and even though the resulting image is not bad, the magnification here isn't as serious, and it just lacks that oomph that the S21's image gave. Now, with the 13 Pro, one of the headline features is the macro lens that Apple is touting, and they chose to implement it on the ultra-wide lens. Even with the 1x camera selected, when you get close enough, it will automatically shift to the ultra-wide, which can focus down to as close as 2 centimeters. It's not going to tell you that it's using the 0.5x lens, you just have to trust that it is doing that if you're holding it that close. But with this lens, it gets the most magnification, which results in a very interesting image. But I feel like the implementation of that, along with the ultra-wide lens, is a bit of a miss here. Now recall that the focal length for the ultra-wide is 13mm, and while the magnification is there, the wider focal length means that more of the background is going to be present, and the resulting image from a less technical perspective, kind of a high-level view, is just not as pleasing, even though you might argue that at a pixel level, the S21 isn't as good, but I do prefer the S21's macro image more because of that better background separation. Other functional considerations, I did an autofocus test here in video mode. It's a bit of a stress test since the cameras are being asked to focus down to a close distance very rapidly. B here focuses the best, and it's nearly instantaneous. If we freeze frame to the point where B locks on, C is in second place, and A is just a tad slower. And a repeat of the same test yields the same result. I actually did it a few times, getting the same result each time. Interestingly, this is the 12 Pro that takes the cake here, followed by the S21, and the 13 Pro just seems just a little tad slower. Will it matter in the real world? I don't know. but it's interesting nonetheless. For an image stabilization test, I did a quick non-scientific running test while following my son on his bike. All the phones actually do a great job here. But interestingly, even with this sort of fast-paced moving shot, you can spot the S21's grainier and lower image quality here. Of course, if you're into this sort of thing, I wouldn't rely on IS for that. I would just get a gimbal, and that would be your best bet there. From a UI and UX perspective, obviously, since I'm used to the 12 Pro, I'm already used to the camera interface, so it wouldn't be fair of me to necessarily say that the iPhones have a better UI or UX, but I couldn't help notice that to get into the more specialized modes, you do have to open a more menu consisting of a litany of options. Just a little more to sort through, whereas on the iPhones, the main specialized modes are just a swipe away. Now, one feature I did appreciate is that out of the box, Samsung gives you the ability to do Pro Video or Pro Photo mode, which gives you the manual settings that you might need for your shutter speed, your ISO, your aperture, and white balance. And unfortunately on the iPhones, that's going to be an app that you're going to have to purchase or some kind of freemium app. Other small things, the iPhone has a countdown light in the timer mode, which I appreciated, whereas with the S21, you kind of just have to guess when it will take the shot and count down in your head or something like that. At the same time, the S21's USB-C port makes downloading a lot of footage a rapid task, whereas relying on the Lightning port or using AirDrop if you have a Mac is a more lengthy affair. You'll only really see that difference come to light if you're downloading a lot of footage at once. If it's just one or two photos, not a big deal. Now, functionally, the 13 Pro does have a few more goodies, such as the cinematic mode, which can absolutely make for a pleasing image, and the ability to re-choose your focus points after you shoot is super convenient. But at least right now, it's limited to 1080-30, which is a little bit funny considering it's called cinematic mode. And also, being a software feature, does look a little artificial to my eyes. As you can see here, the center of the right side of the squash, it does blur every now and then, kind of uncharacteristically. Also, cinematic mode does output in hybrid log gamma, or HLG 2000, so you will have to know how to deal with it in post if you do intend on editing for SDR delivery or viewing on SDR monitor. With both the 12 Pro and the 13 Pro, you have 10-bit HDR out of the box, and with an app like Filmic Pro, you can actually shoot 10-bit SDR. Official ProRes will be coming for the 13 Pro soon. Not that it will really be too useful for most folks, of course, but I will take a look when that comes out. But these do have the pro-level features that will allow users to really flex their creative muscle a lot more. And you'll notice I don't talk about the front-facing camera, and that's because I'm a serious guy. And I don't spend very much of my time taking pictures of myself very often. Ironic, because here I am on YouTube, right? Only kidding, but front-facing cameras being what they are right now, I don't think there's enough of a significant difference or technical purpose to seriously use that as a purchasing decision factor. Of course, that's my perspective, and hey, if you like taking selfies, okay. Lastly, before wrapping it all up with a recommendation, you might be using your phone for some content creation or some quick interviews, so let's just take a quick listen to the performance of the built-in camera's mic in video. Audio test, 1, 2, 3. 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 Galaxy S21. This is an audio test, 1, 2, 3 with the built-in camera. This is an audio test with the iPhone 12 Pro with the built-in microphone. This is an audio test, 1, 2, 3. This is an audio test, 1, 2, 3 with built-in camera. This is an audio test, 1, 2, 3. They're all pretty close, but I noticed that the S21's mic picked up more environmental noise here, and I purposely left my desktop running right beside me, and you can hear that fan a lot more with the S21's footage. And the iPhones do seem a little bit better at noise suppression. I did prefer the audio quality on the 12 Pro the most, at least for my speaking voice, but those two were pretty similar. Alright, so to sum it all up, I think these cameras are all at a minimum good, but there was one phone that was always playing catch up here, and that was the Galaxy S21. In general, the outdoor image quality was lower quality, and indoors is where it struggled a little bit, and well, for personal stuff, IG, and other casual applications, absolutely, it's more than a passing grade here. And if you love Android, this is a fine choice. Once you consider the fact that it's a cheaper phone than the other two, at a very reasonable price point right now, in fact, that does tend to put things into perspective a little bit more. But OS preferences aside, if your first priority is to get a great camera and you want to use it for serious photography or videography, the S21 level of quality is a little limiting in my opinion. Between the 13 Pro and the 12 Pro, the difference, at least to me, was not as stark, and the reality is these two are very, very close, mostly because of how good the 12 Pro is already. And when looking at them blind and choosing the one I preferred, a lot of times I actually prefer the 12 Pro, and I want to say that there's a very subtle difference in the color science between the 13 Pro and the 12 Pro. Now, it's not enough to make a difference in real life, but all that is to say, unless you can get a great trade-in deal or carrier deal, which there are right now, there's less of a point in upgrading just for the pure imaging ability. Now, if you don't need the tele or the macro, I'd actually take a look at the 13, since that has most of the camera features and those two lenses that most folks would want, with a lower price tag. And of course, there are some other features you give up too, but you save a little bit of dough there. As a complete package though, from top to bottom, the iPhone 13 Pro is absolutely a killer. Can the 13 Pro replace a professional camera with professional lenses for a professional purpose? Definitely not. But when you consider that this thing has an ultra-wide tele, a standard lens, decent macro, has night mode, has great low light performance, you can hand hold it with image stabilization, impressive AI portrait modes in both still and video, I don't think you're going to fit a semi-pro kit like that in your pocket anytime soon, and it can still do what a phone does, right? And gosh, if this is the camera you happen to have with you, what a camera it is. It's a ridiculous amount of firepower for a go anywhere and do anything device, and I think in many circumstances it can replace a semi-pro mirrorless or DSLR kit, especially if that kit is aging. And so for creatives like myself, this is highly, highly recommended. So I'll do it for this showdown today. I hope you enjoyed the samples and the content. If so, give a like. Also, if you're into this sort of stuff, I'll be doing some similar reviews in the future. Also checking out ProRes when it comes out officially. Make sure you're subscribed for this and other tech content. A few product links down below for your reference. A big thank you for watching today.